podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. Peace. I'm Majestic.
My brother, Justice Rajee.
All right. So, just so we have a hit this week. I thought we haven't talked about it, but I would say, I guess the defining conversation, one of the defining conversations besides the South African that is running around supposedly making government more efficient, is this like trade tariff war, this sort of initiation of financial conflict. You sent me some pieces, and we're not maybe going to get all into the depth of those, of sort of like, folks applying a bit of like, oh, well, there's a strategy around, reshaping the global trade system by doing this and doing that, or the instability, you could do this or do that. It just has been, it's sitting in the different seats that I sit in, as a person working around doing some, public policy project, and doing some advocacy around that has direct impact in my work. Being on a school board where I'm monitoring these same things from the perspective of a person that has to make a decision about a budget at some point. Reading into what's happening at the federal level and trying to understand what does and doesn't affect us in the area of governance that I'm responsible for. And then just as a person in America that, is how you say, if you are a person that gazes at your 401k or investment accounts or 403b or whatever kind of account that you have that maybe has your retirement funds, probably not the week to look at what the balance says. It's been a real, for lack of a better word, bananas Foster, sort of like, what is it crazy like a fox that they used to say, or is it just, yeah, I'm gonna throw stuff up against the wall and I'm gonna say stuff, and we'll see what happens. It is a strange economic moment, and then to see the mix of either, how everything is like framed within a campaigneering motion. So if you're someone who would consider yourself, politically oppositional, like, you need to get together your talking points about how, yeah, look at how they're destabilizing everything. Or the other side going like, yeah, we need to shake it up because the stuff wasn't working, we think, or at least we feel like it wasn't working. We don't really have evidence that it wasn't working, but that's how we feel. Maybe some folks have very, pointed points. So yeah, I just wanted to give aside a moment for us to like sort of chew on this, because this is someone who's invested in and concerned about, community change, folks' social and economic future. The trade context that we exist in as in our communities, affects it doesn't totally control the options that we have, but it does impact whatever strategy we're saying for people to follow to like have a good life, and a life that is they're able to do what they need to do and have a level of dignity and care and love for their community. So yeah, I would love to get a couple of your thoughts on tariff mayhem, as it were.
Tariff man. Yeah. So I mean, one, and we go back to this often, but I think it's important. It's important to think about when we identify leaders, whether elected or otherwise. When someone tells you what they think, you should believe them. Now, if you are willing to hold your nose to something someone thinks because you like most of what they do, that's okay too. Just don't come back and be like, how could you do this? During the campaign, he talked about, first of all, he's been like a terrorist since the 80s.
Yeah.
Like since the 80s, he's been thinking that China and Japan are ripping us off. Whether that is objectively true or not is, a macro conversation, which I want to get into in a second. But it is true that he has thought this. So for him to get there and try to do it again, because we should all note he tried in the first administration and guys would just hide the papers.
Right.
You know what I mean? Gary Cohn would just hide stuff. No, we're not even taking that in there.
Right. We're not gonna let you see what we're doing over here.
Yeah, we're not even get to that point, right? And so we should believe people. They tell you something, and if you vote for them because you say, "Hey, this person's going to bring back prosperity to my community. He's going to unleash opportunity." That again, that is fine for you to say it, but that person is telling you they're going to do it via this. You know what I mean? Like they're going to do it via tariffs, which is going to have some pain, right? Tariffs are a tax. That doesn't mean, hey, gay, you don't tax, maybe, but it does mean you're a tax. Second of all, a funny thing to me is how for 1 week we're all macroeconomics economists.
Yeah. We were like, oh man, global tariffs. Can't do tariffs. You gotta come at it with low interest loans. T-bills.
We done went from being relationship experts because he's like everybody in the black community is relationship experts for a while. So now we done went from being relationship experts to macroeconomists, or talking about class class issues in our community.
Right,
We
right, right.
became sociologists, right? Which also is like one of those things like, do you care? Are you focusing on what people are telling you to focus on, or are you focusing on the thing you think is important?
Mm-hmm.
And there's something to be thought about. Like, are you focusing on the thing or sets of things that is going to bring about the change you want to see? Or is it like, can someone whipsaw your head? Now, this is a big issue, so I'm not trying to say this is a whipsaw. The idea that everyone's an economist now is hilarious
Mm-hmm.
in how we arrive at it, and then we have to go forward. But to connect it to that point is this, Jeff, and I want to get your take on it. When we talk about economic development and community development in our communities, it is from an extremely micro perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we are usually talking about someone inducing resources to bring a certain amount of jobs to a neighborhood, and then provide the resources or the healthy host environment, if you will, to be able to help people get to that opportunity, get to prosperity, and move forward, right? And that's generally how we talk about economics. Or we're talking about businesses within the context that we are used to creating. Usually they tend to be business to consumer, not exclusively, but it tends to be business to consumer when
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about people doing business. So the framework of our microeconomic perspective of what economics for people look like, as well as the vast majority of how our firms are structured in our communities, and the form of B2C, business to consumer engagement, kind of points to either agreement or acquiescence to the global free market model, right?
Yeah.
Right. Either, hey, this is just what's working, or we want to work, or this is what we think will be better. And I think it's important for us to unwrap that a little bit. Like, again, say what you will about this stuff happening, but there's hey, there's sets of people, and I've shared with you the article with Oren Cass, right? There's sets of people who've been thinking about this for a long time, and it's much more nuanced than what we currently saw with Liberation Day. But there are sets of people who think, hey, by doing these things, this allows us to do this. And yes, there are places. in the world that do not allow our meat, do not allow this. There's people we don't allow certain things in. So tariffs and these kind of trade barriers are part of the free trade system.
Mm-hmm.
When we only are looking at microeconomics, it shows that we are at the whim of the presently existing model and what we think that model gets us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important for us to be able to do something beyond the micro. And I think it's, you saw William Julius Wilson and other folks like in the 70s. You saw them kind of going to more of a, even if you don't want to call it macro, I mean, I think you actually could, of thinking about like post industrial society and what was going to be the role for government within a place when we went post-industrial and we reduced trade barriers and companies could create what they're creating for much cheaper, and essentially America became a consumer nation. So then what we do, we create products to sell to consumers because we are essentially a mall, right? We're a giant shopping mall. And that has had, whether you say increased quality of life, you can buy a cheap television, you know, you can buy like, you know, knockoff sneakers for relatively inexpensive that looks like the stuff you could, but that you pay 3x or 4x or more. So I just think about, we need to have a vantage point. We don't just need to have a vantage point on microeconomics. We don't just need to have a vantage point on what, like, even the quality of the job. We have to have a vantage point on what is our relationship to the kind of opportunity, the kind of work that happens in our community, which means we have a take on the macro sense of what we're doing. And we don't just pressure our electeds on workforce development dollars.
Mm-hmm.
We don't just, we don't just say, what are the kids learning in school? Because what the kids are learning in school is to fit into the current model.
Yeah.
Like that's what our children are all learning stuff within the context of America being broadly defined a consumer economy with elements of manufacturing where we have an advantage, whether through government sponsored investment or for some other reason. So I just wanted to put that out there because it made me realize that, like, sometimes we're not having the conversation we want to have if we're talking about, as we often do, the world that we want to create.
Yeah. Well, the thing that came to my mind, like, minor than this, and I appreciate that angle because, like, I tend to. I'll say this. I remember. I remember where they when the first, like, the big world globalization protests of the 90s.
Oh, Seattle. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and like and and folks like, yeah, like the free trade is only about you know expanding U.S. input or money movement, and I remember like trying to understand like the overall like concern, right? Was it about the movement of capital without oversight? Was it the move? Was it just the undue influence in other people's society? Was it, I mean, it tended to be, it was a big picture conversation that I don't have the capacity to to whittle down into a smaller thing, but like trying to like get into, to quote the Magnificent, like, damn, what made them people so mad? You know what I'm saying? Like, folks was
Right.
out there like
Yeah.
ready to
Yeah.
like
That
tear it
definitely was
down.
what made them so bad. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, wait a minute, am I missing like yeah, like I get it. Like we don't want unfettered, imperialism and supporting, people who are basically, taking advantage of their own people. Is we, the, similarly echoed in the Wall Street Occupy, at least stated to be a part of the Tea Party movement, although I feel like you can't talk about the Tea Party without talking about race. And, y'all can be mad at me later if y'all want to, but you just can't. So I don't see that as exactly but it was analogous to the Wall Street move, Occupy Wall Street world. You know,
Can I say something real quick on that? Just please, can you,
if,
keep that point? I think we've talked about this. There is deep discontent with the current structure of how America functions versus how people want it to function. Rather, we're getting kind of this world we're talking about now of whether you want to call it populism or not.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
All the way to the other space of, hey, we need to fundamentally change how these systems function, who they recognize, right?
mm-hmm.
One thing is clear in between there. No one's really happy with the
Yeah.
current thing.
That's where I was going. Is that
Yeah, okay, all right.
both
My
of these
bad. I just was
all of these
when you
movements,
said it, that's what I was thinking. Like, damn,
and even
we
this,
handle
even the, as I call it, the folks who will give you the like, well, Justice, about this, the support for Trump, and a macro, I would look at it as just the reality of the party of grievance, and the manifestation of those who are dissatisfied within a system, trying to shift it, you know, on different axes than other folks who are dissatisfied within the system. But we can agree
right.
that there is, and it's a consistent sentiment around, these things aren't working. This needs to be different. It's not fair. Uh, you know, this way you get pulled into the conversation, and the conversation ends up settling in this the dialogue of like the stuff that shouldn't be, so to speak. But often it doesn't shift to then like, well, what would be the components of a different model? For me, that's not an exploration to say like don't change anything. It's to say, when we start saying we're changing stuff, like let's look at the desired impacts and effect. If it ends up we're doing these, and I like that you framed that with the micro versus macro, discussion, because like I think we find ourselves, especially in a lot of the like larger community fights, with public facing institutions that do a thing, whether it be a school district, a city commission, a development body, these kind of actually micro area activities that are not around like what is the fundamental way that we think we should live as people, and therefore we from that we develop, we want the type of housing, or we organize ourselves within the physical space in tune with that sort of behavior and expectation. So, my like example would be if someone, instead of discussing like, yeah, well, why is it hard for folks to live in multi-generational housing? But we might get into the physical plant of the housing, as opposed to talking about, well, some of us have developed, we have developed a structural character for a lot of our, popular senses of who we are, that is very individual and is not based within living with your relatives or siblings or close friends. It's like, yeah, I got my own place. I got my own big screen TV, got my own game controller, got my own phone, got my own refrigerator, got my own, and not that there's anything wrong with to be by yourself. That's cool. I ain't mad at it. You know what I'm saying? But it's the conversation when it gets to like what will, I'm just reading through a column, and I'll maybe put a link to it, where the person's advocating around like sprawl, right? And now sprawl, though, is it has this negative context, and it probably is negative for the most part, but also it's something to be said where, yeah, somebody's actually building some housing as opposed to not building. Right now, I understand the importance of rates, meaning what you're doing over time, and how if you're doing something, even if in the moment it's great, but in the long term, we know, as I like to say, that we're going to create something that's unaffordable and is dissatisfying once it gets to maturity, even if it felt good when people bought the house 15 years ago. In 20 years, they're like, man, we can't get no buses through that street no more. I'm like, yeah, they could have known that when they built it, but y'all didn't want to, the way these tools, to discuss development have largely activated a way to not do. But even the bigger question of like why develop, like why are we doing what we're doing, right? So like that macro lens of economics, trying to like capture and understand what people are doing or way money is moving or way things change in the society based on larger themes than just like uh if the price of pumpkins, there was a pumpkin plague, or like this shit, the eggs are all out of control. So like now, since egg prices are out of control, these other unintended consequences, right, would may impact perception or funding or where economic decisions go. The macro may still be like, yeah, we're still selling eggs though. So yeah, they're more
Right.
expensive, but they're still selling, right? And so then we don't get into this conversation. We don't get into the conversation of going like, well, when it was happening and companies were moving their manufacturing jobs overseas, some of the communities that were most affected, um, you know, basically I would say folks like from our communities who were in the first wave of deindustrialization
No, actually, absolutely.
did not have a whole lot of like, sad tears and violin music for folks that was like, oh, y'all was over there, getting them good union bennies for or maybe sometime union, not always. But you was over there working for 15, 20 more years when they moved, as a Trenton makes the world takes. But by the time, I got out of high school, that wasn't necessarily the case on the way that had been for 30 or 40, 50 years.
Yeah, what was y'all the workshop of the world? Like that was like, it's funny to think now when like you go to Trenton to think about Trenton that this was like a place that everywhere in the world was like stuff came from Trenton that made shit. Like,
Yeah. Like, and then you have a whole generation of people who have no relationship with that idea at all, besides seeing the bridge that says it. Like they don't have any like, yeah, my dad is he's a tool machinist over at the Roebling steel mill. The Roebling factory, I think, is like turning it's like lofts and something else now, and trying to be lofts. You know what I mean?
can
Like,
I can I touch on this? Can I add on?
yeah,
So here's what you just said that I think is really important. It goes back to my thing about William Julius Wilson and other people, in his book specifically when work disappears, right? So we were having these conversations in the 70s, and that's where you actually see the full employment conversation, right? Where like you see macroeconomic sociologists being like, yo, the decisions that we're making from a macroeconomic perspective, you're going to either have to do universal basic income or promise full employment.
mm-hmm.
In 78, 79, I think Conyers put a bill forth in 79 about this because they saw then that what was happening was going to impact our communities in a certain way, right? To your point, once it gets flattened even further in the 90s, you start to see even more isolation and it hits the places and it gets rid of the manufacturing jobs. And we start to transition to this kind of economy of where everybody sells something, no one makes something. But to your point, our communities felt the fact that people stopped making things way before it became a national issue. Although, I mean, obviously in the 80s, from every movie that made the Japanese look bad and Americans
Oh
look
yeah,
good, right? The propaganda of that, notwithstanding, because I mean, that was there, right? That was present. So I don't want to minimize that. But we saw it. And then here's the reality: a lot of men and then increasingly women in our communities have never responded to having in this shift never got the kind of wages that our families were used to
mm-hmm.
in real wage time. My grandmother worked at the Stetson hat factory. My grandfather made and moved furniture, right? Like they both made shit. Like, and so my grandmother ended up in healthcare, right? So we ended up really doing a consumer job for an aging population.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Look at what's going on in the hood now. Home health care is everywhere.
Everybody and it's a boom industry because you're gonna have a wave of older folks, right? The biggest in the history of the country. But, 20 years, 30 years when that wave, sadly, I don't have a nice way to say this. The wave is over,
Right.
right? And it turns into, like that, the social context where somebody, hit you if you just be like on a random, area based, like, Facebook board or something. Somebody be like, yo, who hiring whatever kind of job? What kind of checks they doing? Right? Because the conversation is like the job is agnostic. It's a job and what it pay. Because the orientation isn't, um I'm I I'm doing this with, like, in the context of some larger mission. It's a job somewhere, and I just need to know how much they pay to do the job. Then I'll figure out whether I'm gonna work the job, because that's my orientation to job. My orientation to the job is not, oh, I'm um that job does a thing in relationship to the neighborhood I'm from, or that job does a thing because us in this city we make such and such. We make hammer tops. Or we do the wood, we do the weaving, on the belt straps, like the place I went in Tupelo down on the reservation. Like, all these different, like, I don't think we think about it that way, but when you start to, like, piece it together, it's like, oh, wait a minute. So, your orientation is just, look, I just got to find something that pays an amount to cover the cost of me living in the thing or place or space that I live in. It's not it doesn't have more meaning than that, which I imagine for some people, they think that's great. But it does beg the question, how can you plan a durable society for yourself as a people without some sense of, like, what it is we do to sustain ourselves? Like, how do if you're pushed out of farming, right? Like, farming, we have an identity around being a farmer. There's a
Right.
um even though it's facing challenges even this day, in that, medicine, especially being a doctor, is it I'll say it should be about, because you actually want to help people medically, not just sort of academic achievement Olympics that you get to prove, like, I'm the smartest person because I'm a doctor. Look what kind of doctor I am. It's like, do you like people? Because that's what a doctor's for. Is
Right.
people, not to just attain research accolades or whatever have you, or esteem. But unfortunately, that's where we're at in that field and some other fields, right? So the subtext sometimes of this merit conversation, and even the framing of the merit conversation around these expensive limited population schools that don't even really serve at parity what their endowments secure, in terms of the amount of people they actually create space to learn and instruct to go out and ostensibly do things, is as much about status and the limitation of supply, so to speak, and to be able to go, yeah, I'm one of the few that's one of these, right? But, and again, for some people, that is a sustainable identity, but we all can't do that. There's 300, it's like 300, was it 300 million Americans, something like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not we can't win. What does that mean if if
Well,
we're getting
and
into,
that's the yeah. No, no. Go ahead.
but
No,
so I'll
pause.
just say the last thing I'll say is, if we're getting into the importance of understanding, if the fear around the economy is about the well-being where I live, the you can't just limit it to the economic stuff. You got to look at the bigger, like, well, why do you want to live in that neighborhood? Besides that, that's the place that you're already at, right? And is it positioned to do these other things? Are we close or far, right? Like, if the manufacturing jobs have been being siphoned out to places outside of areas of density for decades, there's no reason to believe that they're going to bring them jobs back to, especially older cities that have, more, lack of a better word, um, post-industrial detritus that
Right.
you can have, where, like, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but whatever the rocket fuel thing that folks are trying to do in Memphis, that the people are rising up about, it's a lot of wild stuff that could be like, oh, let's put this over here by these people that don't have the social economic capital to fight us on it. You know what I'm saying? That I don't know if how that maps into this economic conversation. Oh, go ahead. You were about to say something.
No, I think what you said though made a good point about why you had people on both sides of the political aisle who were just not happy because there was an identity conversation. And what was his name that did Bowling Alone? It was the guy who had earlier in the '90s he did the whole IQ thing, and that was like a crazy thing that black folks had lower IQs. But then
Oh,
he did the book Bowling Alone,
yeah.
and he talked about this was coming, right?
Hmm.
Like I give him credit. He talked about like, yeah, there's some isolated people out here, man, and it's going to have an impact. And guess what? William Julius Wilson did the same thing for us. There's some isolated guys out here, and it's going to have an impact. That impact. I always go back to 1979. The Ed Bradley on 60 Minutes did a special at Overbrook High School in Philly, and it was like, you know, it was like the first generation that Muggs was looking at like black kids that like they were unsure what they were going to do with their lives post college, post high school, and there wasn't a clear path. You put it in context. That was 1979. We're looking at 46 years ago. We're looking at multiple generations of black and some brown, depending on the the orientation and context. People who have had to move to an economy which we haven't been sure actually works for the masses of people,
Yeah.
right? Again, this is not a value judgment for successive presidents, all that kind of stuff. More just saying, regardless of, you're saying, hey, go sell something or let me get you enough money to go buy something, right? And it even makes the fight for 15 conversation be interesting because it elevates it that, like, hey, everyone deserves to have a livable wage, but in the context of they need to be able to keep up in jobs that traditionally were not full-time jobs that have become full-time jobs.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we need to support people, and that's a worthy endeavor. That's not my point. My point is I never confused my summer job with a real with a long-term job.
Right. Yeah. And
But
and,
when we
and
get to what
no, and definitely the like the sense that like I had either you had someone explain to you that like yeah this is a job, yeah, it's good, man, get you a job, get a little money in your pocket, you ain't gonna raise no family doing that, or like you ain't gonna be on your own, or whatever the way it was said to you, whether directly or implicitly, right? Because sometimes the thing about in your home, one of your peoples might be like, yeah, well, I'll say this. I'll take a risk and say your parents definitely told you, hey man, go ahead and do that job, but you need to do this other stuff the same way my mom let me know. Like, yeah, like that's a good job. You can get a job at the state, but you need to do this, do. You need to have a sense of where you're going to something that is higher paying. Then, again, I worked at McDonald's for a year and a half in high school. I worked in an amusement park in the summer. I did all kinds of food service jobs. Great jobs that I made money at, and I appreciate it. And I had, I respect the time and energy, but also it was very clear that like, yeah, the pathway to making the kind of money I think I would need to make to really feel secure, the 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 entry level or the base level was not going to do it. Like it wasn't going to be enough. And to not have but understanding that at the same time is like, but we as a society have decided these jobs have to happen because if you ever been cussed out because the fries was cold, you know what I'm saying? You'll know you will not be under any suspicion how important, what I mean, let alone our experience that everybody that works these sorts of jobs were called essential workers during the pandemic, and they needed to report.
right.
We could get the fruit and vegetables out of the cold case, and we could get some fast food on the way home. You know what I'm saying? Like y'all need to go to work, which is we got crazy society with that because it was like y'all got to go. Y'all can't not go. I mean,
Well, but
I ain't
I
going.
think
Like people was calling
right.
like I ain't going, but you need to be there so I can get this coffee while I go get some fill up my trunk with some with toilet paper and stuff.
Well, that's what I think that is part of it too. Like all of us depend on this interconnected web of service economy. So as a result of like, well, no one's really making nothing, but everybody's selling something and everybody's buying something.
Yeah.
And we really need y'all that sell stuff. Because guess what? If y'all don't sell stuff, all of this goes away. Right. And you got to sell stuff. Why? Because we buy stuff. And guess what? So we need cheap stuff because you don't want to buy expensive stuff. Why? Because you just don't want to. It's like that classic Dave Chappelle joke where he was like, Donald Trump wants to bring jobs back from China. He's like, we don't want to make iPhones. We want them. We won't pay $9,000 for an iPhone.
Right. We do.
And his genius is that he's telling us something really penetrating to our economic model.
Yeah.
You want a thing that is literally a walking computer 10 times more powerful than what you had 4 years ago. The cost of it, you're never really clear. But you can't make it here that anyone will buy it. And so if you just think about that idea, that thing that has become so essential to us, you now can't even imagine making them in the country of that you live in.
Yeah. And it's a, and I don't want to go too long because I know we got moves. Yeah. It's the thing I would say with this that, and it's been my own driver, is like what's happening around us. One, I've always been in that. I think I've been consistent even in our conversation here, is how much we don't know we don't know how stuff works. And you can not know how something works and have a curious, critical engagement with it and ask questions as you push back against the forces you feel it's applying to you in your life. With at least a degree of like, I think y'all don't like what I'm feeling. I don't know if you're totally wrong, but I need to let somebody know I feel it. Especially I would say, my feeling in the last 20, 30 years has been that one can be empowered for being like, yeah, because this is why we need to do this very specific thing right now, and then it'll be better. And my inclination in this moment is that is not the right answer. I ain't saying it's the wrong answer, but I don't think it's the right answer. In that it can lead you almost down, instead of like am I pulling back at the right angle to see a bigger lens on what is, not the tariffs are ridiculous. Because just for the record, when they put out that ridiculous chart, and it was like they would, even a very limited exposure to economic and macroeconomic theory would tell you. I mean, I guess you could get a number that way, but I'm pretty sure it don't mean nothing. Right? To come up, we put the double tariff on Cambodia, like Cambodia over there, like, yeah, I'm saying, can't wait to stick it to America on whatever it is,
whatever trinket or whatever mango that you got from there.
I know, I know, like the parts of the chicken we don't eat sell big in China and Southeast Asia, like the chicken feet, stuff like that. So
right.
Production, like I know that's a thing, or at least it was. And if my data's wrong, and not because it's something wrong with it, just that they eat it, and Americans have been trained and marketed to not eat it. Just right. There's a whole lot of stuff when it comes to meats, especially, that we've been marketed to not eat, and they use the waste, and they're like, oh wait, we could sell that. Yeah, they freeze them joints up and they sell it overseas, other places, and vice versa. There's bilateral of stuff people don't eat that's a part of every trade dynamic. So there's like, the ridiculousness of the reasoning that's shared, but the larger conversation about like, so if we're talking again about us, our communities, the want for a overall more fair, just society, are we pulling back to really have a deeper conversation about like, yeah, I mean, the tariffs are going to destabilize, but if to destabilize an economy that's been kicking us in the tail, even if you found a way to swim, ahead of the stream in it, which is cool, right? That you swimming ahead, cool for you, but it's like, how long can you stay swimming ahead of the stream before you got to go? You know what? We probably need to change this because if I swim this hard, how long am I have to swim this hard so I can stay, again, in relative comfort, or relative stability vis-a-vis everything else that's going around me, and pretending maybe that there's no cost for others, right? And again, a cost that I would say is unfair and unnecessary. uh so it's a wild moment, right? And I just wanted to think about, like, be I think there's a way to pick at the ridiculousness of the economic policy, but then again turn that lens inward and say, well, what are the decisions and the bets that I'm making, and what do they imply about what the standard should be? And then do a little exploration there around, like, what is really a more fair, or what is a better direction for us to go? So, cheer.
I'll say in closing, I think there's no accident the past two presidents have operated with a stated goal to bring more manufacturing back to America.
Mm-hmm.
For, I think, similar reasons based upon complicated issues that we do not bother the American vox populi about,
Mm-hmm.
like the real role of China and global engagement, the role of Russia around oil and gas, and its oil and gas sending it to Europe and Ukraine. Like, these are the Saudis and the sovereign wealth funds. Like, there's no accident that these are the names we always hear, right? And I think for me, what I would like to leave with is, like, when we center ourselves as citizens of the world, and we center ourselves as global citizens who are thinking about the big picture and how it relates to the micro, let's really think about that when we decide our next after school program.
Mm.
When we're planning for the 20, 30, 50, and 100-year education model, so that our children truly exist in a global economy, and not just saying because they're a coder. It's fine if they're a coder, and if coders end up being the line, like the veritable line staff of factories 60 years ago, right? Fine. But let's think about it and not just take it for granted that the things that we see that, to your point, have been generally kicking us in the ass need to be the status quo. And do we need to break that? So, yep.
Fair enough. So, there's some food for thought. And, we'll get back to it in the next time we had on. So, with that, I say peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, Majestic. Good Brothers is a podcast. I always say it's a part of the Ask Your Oldhead podcast. But I think, going forward, we might say something different. More to come. So, you know what to do. Look, like, subscribe, rate, share, search Justice Rajee on Patreon, become a patron. That's going to stay the same. More than likely. We'll see. In all things, though, if you enjoy listening to us add on, do what you can to share with others, and make good decisions. Do not obey evil orders. You know what I'm saying? So be safe. Peace.